Our previous program was devoted to the origins of terrorism and its connections with financing schemes by a third party of bumping warring nations against each other. You have convinced us that weapons are most often taken for the realization of someone else's evil will, implemented not through orders, but bypassing consciousness. The warring party, because of non understanding, actually solves the unannounced economic problems of the invisible scriptwriters, the third force, which is not participating in the war. Do you want to say that alcohol and tobacco, as well as military weapons, are a certain instrument of governance in someone's own private hands? After all, everyone takes a glass of alcohol and a cigarette of their own free will.
One's own free will is already the final stage, when all the rough preparatory work is fully completed. In this sense, military weapons are often taken into one's hands also of one's own free will, doing so with desire and enthusiasm. The most important thing that we must comprehend during the cycle of our programs is the principles of governance towards people and leaders of states through the bypassing of their consciousness. When everyone within the measure of his understanding does what he wants, what he considers necessary, and within the measure of his non-understanding, he implements some scenario alien to him, well known and desired for someone else. The conversation that we will have today is very far from any kind of anti-alcohol, anti-tobacco propaganda. Firstly, this is not part of the scope of my tasks, and secondly, all this smoking kills and so on actually works as the best advertisement of tobacco and alcohol among teenagers and helps to strengthen bad habits, as forbidden fruit is always sweet. As my destiny took shape in different countries of the world, and above all in the system of Zhret's knowledge of Russia, I have received access to information that is purposefully hidden from people. It is this information that I consider it my duty to share with the audience. How they will react to this information, whether they will change their views on alcohol and tobacco is up to them, a matter of their own choice. However, I will say that on my life path, there are already dozens of people I personally know who have completely changed their destiny for the better. They are entirely different from what they were before. This information is especially important for women, since they more subtly feel the threats to genetics of their own future offspring at the unconscious levels of the psyche, and this information almost always finds a response in their souls.
What reasons do you have for believing that alcohol and tobacco are instruments of global governance?
If in the previous program we touched on the sixth priority of generalized means of governance of conceptual power, military weapons, today we will talk about the lower in performance speed but much more powerful fifth priority, the genocidal weapon that undermines the country's gene pool, the gene pool of subsequent generations. A gunshot is triggered instantly, but firstly the shooter is visible, and secondly the effect is local. If you have introduced the tradition of alcohol drinking into a family, then in 1 or 2 generations the entire family line will disappear. The power of this priority is visible in the total extermination of the Native Americans, who were invulnerable to military weapons, but vulnerable to firewater. The result is stable. Now the Native Americans in the USA are shown as a relic. No less impressive results were obtained by the operation of accustomizing our people to alcohol drinking. It always begins according to the classical Masonic canons with the prohibition of alcohol. The forbidden fruit, as we have already noted, is always sweet. At the peak of unsatisfied demand, alcohol is offered, campaigned to people on every corner, and then the process is going on. As the author of this scenario, the notorious architect of perestroika, a direct agent of external conceptual power, used to say, "Those who drink also encroach on what does not belong to them, on the health of future generations." The weapons of genocide include, first of all, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, genetic engineering, TV, computer addiction, some kinds of music, narcoticization. The undermining of the gene pool of the controlled country is carried out, as a rule, bypassing consciousness through a gentle push on this path through traditions, proverbs, and sayings that are introduced into the consciousness of society. Therewith, the majority is not conscious of these zombifying schemes and believe that alcohol and tobacco are their personal choice. Meanwhile, you will not be able to find, for example, a single film that does not show scenes of smoking and alcohol drinking. The doctor advises you a glass of cognac, the church offers you communion wine, and there even exists that term, sacramental wine. Is this by chance? The CSS, Dead Water, convincingly proves that we are dealing with a system of complex zombification worked out by the pseudo-Jretzes of conceptual power, as without narcoticizing the population, it's impossible to turn the people into a herd. It's impossible in principle to ensure governance over this population. This algorithm has been known since the time of Catherine II. A drunken nation is easier to govern. But it was these very objectives that were set at the forefront of perestroika. They were also announced in a poetic form. We are a herd, many millions of head. Graze reunited, as one do we bleat. Regret we for naught, and for naught do we weep. Mutton flock, such is our destiny red. Power over us has been given to shepherds, by the will of the Magus, such is the word. Thus do we live and not know the oppressor, transmuter of us into sheep in the herd. In principle, it is impossible to do in relation towards a sober nation what has been done with regard to Russia over the past 15 years.
What can you say about the history of the appearance of alcohol?
It seems to many that alcohol and addiction to it arose on their own. Meanwhile, the tool of narcoticization of biological populations is borrowed by the pseudo-Jretzes from the life of insects. It is well known that anthills as well as beehives are hierarchically organized communities with clearly structured roles for all participants, among which there are guard squads. An attack on an anthill by other insects is not very promising due to a well-organized confrontation on the side of the ants. However, the fight against the ants is won through deception by the Lomechusa. Their method is narcoticization. The Lomechusa is capable of producing and secreting alcohol from its organism. At the initial stage, these insects harmlessly settle down at the entrance to an anthill. Alcohol-containing secretions of a special gland located in the pores of the Lomechusa are consumed by the ants, after which not a trace remains of their proper organization. This anthill ends up with a ruin. The shift of this algorithm onto human society has demonstrated its flawless effectiveness. And further on, one just has to do it so that society will not comprehend that this is introduced from the outside with malicious intent, but will perceive this external aggression as its own traditional addictions. So the alcoholizing of Russia, who had never before touched alcohol, began from the moment of the Christianization of Rus and the malicious imposition of Byzantinism. The first step of alcohol narcoticization is the first sip of church wine, the first sip of champagne, the first sip of beer. It is the first sip that proves that a person has lost the criterion, distinction, and does not regard alcohol as a weapon of genocide. When people buy alcohol, I compare it to a situation where cockroaches would pay for chlorophos. Originally, our traditions, incompatible with the consumption of tobacco and alcohol, are preserved in old believer families and in the families that have adopted the system of knowledge Dead Water. And today the branches of our party, Unity, work in 60 regions of Russia, from Kamchatka to Kaliningrad. It is possible to defeat alcohol and tobacco only on the worldview level, recognizing it as a weapon of genocide. In our traditions, the consumption of even one sip of alcohol is excluded.
In your book, Conceptual Power, Myth or Reality? Simple on the systematic mechanisms of the plunder of Russia, I saw the chapter on the physiology of intoxication. Could you dwell on this issue?
Let us recall the well-known song in Russia. I drank a glass, drank two, there appeared a noise in my head. What made this noise? This is not explained to us by any doctor, because such information can noticeably sober up society. The drug business will suffer, and thoughts about shepherds and their goals may appear in people's heads. It is some parts of the brain that make this noise in the head, the blood supply of which has stopped due to the influence of alcohol. For people initiated into such information, as for me, I studied this in the USA, and also with specialists from our first medical university, this effect is called the grape bunch effect. The fact is that when alcohol appears in the bloodstream, it begins to come into contact with erythrocytes, red blood cells which carry oxygen from the lungs to the tissues and carbon dioxide in the opposite direction. Spirit is known to be used for degreasing and cleaning surfaces. When it enters the bloodstream, the red blood cells acquire a new property. They begin to stick together, forming clusters, grape-looking bunches, the size of which is determined by the amount of alcohol drunk. Our circulatory system, in certain parts of the body, brain, retina, represents the thinnest capillaries, and the diameter of some, the thinnest of them, is commensurate with the size of red blood cells. Those grape-looking bunches that appear in the blood form blood clots in the thin capillaries, and the blood supply to certain groups of neurons in the brain stops. There appears numbness, and then the death of certain microregions of the brain, which is perceived by a person as a harmless state of intoxication. In this state, some of the neurons in the brain die. According to experts, 100 grams of vodka irreversibly destroy about 1 million neurons, and the recovery of reversible effects occurs, under favorable circumstances, that is, with no single sip of alcohol, within 2 to 3 years. Hangover syndrome is nothing more than a process associated with the removal of neurons from the brain that died as a consequence of the absence of blood supply. The body rejects dead cells, which causes morning headaches. A person who drinks alcohol in the morning literally urinates with his own brains. Medical professionals emphasize the medical accuracy of this classic terminology of initiates. Thus, even a single consumption of alcohol changes the capabilities of the brain and, above all, its subtle structures, which are responsible for the psyche for reason and intuitive insights formed at the unconscious levels of the psyche. It is no coincidence that the World Health Organization unequivocally classifies alcohol as a type of drug. Not everyone knows that the surface of the brain of an alcoholic, according to pathologists, resembles a felt surface completely eaten out by moth. Consumption of alcohol, in any, including moderate doses, inflicts an inevitable strike on the genetics of both your yet unborn children and at the biogenetic level on the health of born children. Unfortunately, no one registers these cause and effect relationships. Have a look at these statistics and you will see a clear relationship between a father drinking alcohol and the state of the health of his child.
However, everyone drinks a little. Is it really harmful?
Nowadays, a new cadre base is being formed in the country from people who will never think of even having a single drop of alcohol, who will never think that the people they love will do this. This is the only previous position on this question, because the theory of moderate drinking is a method of accustomizing people to alcohol, and it is zombifying our children. First, everyone has their own measure. They themselves decide how much they drink. Secondly, for the psyche of many, it is an inevitable drug addiction. First of all, it is the so-called cultural drinkers who are socially dangerous. The child has no positive attitudes towards an alcoholic lying on the pavement. He is programmed for alcohol by that cultural drinker who is shown with a glass of cognac or a bottle of beer, or by a cowboy with an elegant cigarette in his mouth. The most socially dangerous drinks are beer and champagne. It is with them that the movement on an inclined plane begins, and especially for children and women. Beer is a springboard to heroin. Statistics tell us about this combination. A multiple increase in production and advertising of beer gives mirror results in the distribution of drugs. It is important for everyone to understand that the difference between beer, cigarettes, and heroin is exactly the same as between a Makarov pistol and a ballistic missile. The purpose is the same, but the destructive power is different.
And what can you tell us about smoking?
In terms of the physiology of its effect on the human body, tobacco is similar to alcohol, as it leads to the same disturbances in the blood supply to the brain, albeit with the help of different mechanisms. A very wide range of toxic substances enters the bloodstream thanks to the smoke of the tobacco through the lungs of the smoker. The organism's defenses are brought into action, the blood vessels begin to spasm, shrink, preventing the penetration of poison-containing blood into the subtle structures of the brain. The non-smoker experiences the same effect when drinking alcohol. The child of a smoking woman definitely has genetic defects.
And now I would like to ask you the most difficult question. If the consumption of tobacco and alcohol has such catastrophic consequences, then how to explain the widespread distribution of alcohol, tobacco, drugs?
By and large, I can answer your question in one phrase. The distribution of all that is conditioned by centuries-proven algorithms for their implantation in society. Many in a conversation with me try to refute my arguments. They tell me, "What kind of schemes are you talking about? This is my personal choice, I do it because I want it, and this is my choice." In reality, in the heads of such opponents, there is a stable illusion created for them, the illusion of independence in choosing a life path. A person's worldview is formed exclusively by the environment. In a printing house, when you print out a white sheet of paper, on that paper you will get what the matrix contains. Every person falls under the same purpose-orientedly created informational matrix. They drink in performances, in films, on television, in the family, and by the end of school these zombie programs are triggered. Hardly ever is there a graduate who finishes school without alcohol in his hands. See for yourselves. I responsibly state to you that you will not find a single film without a scene of alcohol drinking and smoking.
Not so long ago, the Russian newspaper named Российская газета gave information about the ability of our heart cells to self-destruction from the effects of alcohol. It also provides information that any animal which is given alcohol inevitably becomes an alcoholic and dies within 20-25 weeks. But people have some kind of protection. Is that true?
Yes, it's true, but not all people have this. People with an animal psyche type become alcoholics after the first sip with the same inevitability. But there are other psyche types. When performing actions, we are guided by 4 groups of interacting factors. 1. Inborn instincts and unconditioned reflexes. 2. Thoughtless following of habits, traditions, copying of actions of others. 3. A calculated, preliminarily considered choice of one or another variant of actions. 4. Intuitive prompts of the soul that can only be understood later. All these factors, one way or another, at least from birth, are present in every person. In the process of life, one or another psyche type is formed in us, with the predominance of one or another factor that induces most actions. Depending on what is in the first place when making decisions, in the same sequence, according to the previous numbering, 4 types of psyche structure are singled out. Animal psyche type, zombie biorobot psyche type, demonic psyche type, and human psyche type. People with the human psyche type exclude alcohol from their life. People with the demonic psyche type rarely drink, but sometimes they do it in order to mingle in the herd and be regarded by the herd as one of them, because it is them who graze zombie biorobots, who all, without exception, drink. In Russia, it is not customary to not drink on New Year, and they cannot go beyond these accepted by everyone and created for everyone norms. But when drinking, they have breaks, because they, in turn, graze hostages of instincts and unconditioned reflexes that have no breaks. Demons, unlike zombie biorobots, do not give a damn about what is accepted by everyone. They themselves make the boundaries of what is permissible and acceptable. And the one with the human type of psyche structure builds his behavior, relying on his intuition and God's providence. So with the help of narcotization of the population, a crowd elite society is built. The future of our country lies in the destruction of crowd elitism, and this can be realized only in a sober society.